when you have financial independence, it means you have enough recurring revenue from your assets to cover your expenses. That's not the time to stop. That's the time to swing for the fences.
That's Garrett Gunderson, personal finance expert and New York Times bestselling author.
That's time to say, what's my vision? What impact do I want to make? That's where you focus on serving others and solving problems, because I can't imagine the mental power it takes to think about how to live off the least amount every single day.
I'm Michael Mogill, founder and CEO of CRISP, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. CRISP started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer. I sat down with Garrett Gunderson to discuss how the wealthy get wealthy, why financial strategies from people like Dave Ramsey and Suze Orman can sometimes miss the mark, and why wealthy families treat legacy like a business.
Every great organization, every great religion, everything that sustained had symbols, they had traditions, they had rituals. And so when we start to really focus on investing in our heirs, capturing our philosophies, and having a financial team that's cohesive, those 3 factors help create sustainable wealth in a way that only one-dimensional planning could never touch.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to remind you that we aren't beholden to any sponsors or run any ads on this podcast. This allows us to present all of our episodes raw and unfiltered. I'm not going to push any made-to-order meal services on you or try to save you any money on your car insurance. That being said, I have one small request. If you receive any value from this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. Pay the fee so we can keep this podcast free. Garrett, welcome to the podcast.
Michael, thanks for having me on, man.
Listen, I'm excited for this. So you've now written what, over 9 books?
Yeah.
Like 9 best-selling books, including a kid's book, which, you know, our girls are a huge fan of.
Yeah, the kids is the 10th book, actually.
The Money Is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that one, thankfully, had a really good co-author, because I tried to write a kid's book and it wasn't very good. And I found this co-author that had written, I don't know how many, 100 children's books, sold over 3 million copies, and she just knows how to speak kids. So I'm glad that the copy made it to your kids.
Yeah, man. Well, we love reading it. And I will say, you know, we're going to talk about one of the books, although I encourage anybody listening to go check out all of them. This is one that's getting kind of an update recently. What would the Rockefellers do? I guess going back, so for those that aren't familiar with this book, what was your motivation for writing this book in the first place?
Well, the reason I wrote it is I was referring business to this individual from this firm that I owned. And we started to add additional individuals to create capacity. And he now had more capacity. And I said, you know what? You have more capacity because we're not doing a good enough job at getting the word out. I'm like, I've got this book in me. Why don't we work on it? I want you to be the numbers guy behind it. I want you to do all the details and the data. And I'm going to create the stories and really dive into the philosophy. And so we had this conversation in 2015 and released it in 2016, and didn't put the same amount of energy in marketing that book like I did my others, but it took off. It's outsold all my other books combined, crazy enough. And it's the only one that pretty much doesn't have any acknowledgement of being on any list either. That's the ironic thing, because I self-published it.
What do you think the intrigue is when people hear about, you know, like the Rockefellers, and how many people are even familiar with the Rockefellers? Do they just associate that with wealth and say, is there some secret out there that I'm not aware of that perhaps I should be aware of? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Vern Harnish wrote a book called The Rockefeller Habits.
Yep.
And it was relatively popular. I read it. I liked it. And then I have this long hair, so people would always be like, what would Garrett do? It was almost like an homage to the what would Jesus do thing. So I was thinking of that in the book, what would the Rockefellers do? And it's really what would the wealthy do? What would billionaires do? And I took the story of the Vanderbilts, who had more money than the U.S. Treasury at one time. That's an insane amount of money. And after Cornelius died, his oldest son doubled their estate in 9 years, but then he died. And 54 years later, the first Vanderbilt died broke. And the last family reunion they had, there wasn't a single millionaire there, even though Gloria Vanderbilt was a multimillionaire, but her son, Anderson Cooper, she didn't give him any money. He had to fake press credentials just to become a journalist because he didn't have any financial wherewithal. And so when you look at that amount of wealth destroyed, but then you look at the Rockefellers, and it's not just the Rockefellers. It's every partner that the Rockefellers had still is moving with generational wealth 6 generations later. And we know this saying, like shirt sleeves is shirt sleeves, or rice paddy to rice paddy, like in 3 generations, that the wealth is typically decimated and gone, and often creating these entitled, spoiled trust fund babies. What did they do differently? And I just said, what is it that anyone could do that they were doing? Because it's hard to build, an oil empire, but it's easy to take some of these core kind of philosophies and tenets and pass that on from generation to generation. And looking at their partners that continue to go 6 generations later and continue to have wealth. And by the way, attorneys are one of the biggest reasons that it works. You have to have a good attorney. If you don't, it doesn't work.
Yeah. And I want to dig into some of the concepts that you outline in the book, but before we do, can you speak to a little bit of your background, right? I mean, obviously there's the books, but you're what I consider somewhat of a contrarian, right?
Yeah.
With a lot of the insights that you're providing, and yet they're hugely popular. It's just a different way of thinking.
My dad was a coal miner. My grandfathers were coal miners, and my great-grandfather left Italy on my mom's side to come to America just in time for a coal mine to explode, and he became a goat herd before a coal miner. So I have this pretty humble blue-collar beginning. But when I was 15 years old, I started my first business. I won $500 being third place of this real young entrepreneur. Then I won first place with $1,000. Then I won first place for the state with $5,000. And in my small town, I thought that was a ton of money. I was like, I want to invest this money. But my mom was like, look, we put cash in coffee cans in the cellar. We don't invest. That's risky. And so I finally turned 18 and didn't have to have a custodian to sign off. And in that pursuit of looking to invest, I got offered an internship, which sounds cool, but it was basically, hey, bring your friends and family. We'll peddle mutual funds and life insurance to them. That was kind of the way it was, but it's how I started to learn. And in 98 and 99, everybody thought I was really smart because the market was doing so well, and we were really, just putting them in mutual funds. And then the year 2000 came, the market started to go down. And that's when I kind of think of my career beginning, because I told everybody I didn't know what I was doing, get their money out of the market and wait for me to figure out something better. And I actually had this guy who became a client, but he was a professor of mine that managed $5 billion in municipal bond funds before he became a professor. He was number one in every category. And I became his workout partner. We played racquetball. We worked out. We had lunch. I just learned as much as I could from him. And I took some of the concepts in Rockefeller method and taught them to him. And he became a client. That was 25 years ago.
Man, I love it. I love it. In the book, I know you emphasize the holistic method, blending financial strategy with clear legacy guidelines, which really distinguishes the entire Rockefeller approach. Let's talk about the transfer of wealth. I know you mentioned that, over multiple generations is typically destroyed, or if it's not destroyed, maybe what's even worse is you create these trust fund babies and these, entitled kids that are very unhappy and, have high levels of depression. So it's like money isn't the answer. What is the true transfer of wealth? What's the right way to do this?
Well, if you start early enough, it's pretty easy to transfer wealth tax-free, but that's where most people focus. I look at it like the family legacy rings. There's these 3 rings. The first ring is the family office. So having a comprehensive, cohesive, communicating financial team that's working from the same page instead of against each other. In the middle class, they typically just go to product peddling people that sell them one-dimensional thing, and then it's not even owned properly, and later on they find out that becomes an issue. They haven't emphasized tax planning or how to structure their loans, and a lot of money's lost that way. The second thing is a family constitution. So the U.S. has this constitution that's 4,400 words long. It's been a game changer, That's it. You use the word game changer here, but it's been a game changer, and all these other countries started to adopt the same thing. So what happens when we actually take our philosophies, our insights, our principles, our greatest lessons, and we capture that, and it becomes a preamble to our estate plan. It becomes a preamble to the trust. So it's a little bit more dynamic, and it's something that we could learn from, so that we're leaving behind a legacy of ideas, not just a legacy of money. That becomes something that our board of trustees or anyone that's involved in the trust could use to help instill certain values into future generations and lessons. And then the third thing is a family retreat. It's about investing in our heirs. It's about the traditions, the rituals, and even the symbols. I have a old school medieval crest that sits up on my mantle that we have meaning, and my kids can tell you what it means because they helped us draw it out and think about what it is. And so we've lost some of that because every great organization, every great religion, everything that sustained had symbols, they had traditions, they had rituals. And so when we start to really focus on investing in our heirs, capturing our philosophies, and having a financial team that's cohesive, those three factors help create sustainable wealth in a way that only one-dimensional planning could never touch.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard and I've seen this, in many cases where simply giving somebody a whole lot of money is one of the worst things you can do. It's one of the worst things you can do for your children. It's probably one of the worst things you can do just for your family as a whole. There's the statistic around the fact that, the percentage of lottery winners that go broke. But the more interesting thing to me was that you're more likely to declare bankruptcy by winning the lottery in America than by not having won the lottery. And that's fascinating. Why is that?
Well, it's like you're a really fit guy. If you hadn't been to the gym and you go into the gym and you see someone else put 405 pounds on a squat rack and you go, I'm going to go try that, it's just going to bury you. And so when we don't earn it, we can't be stewards of it. When it's just given to us, it's like my son once asked me when he was really little, he says, Dad, are we rich? I'm like, well, I am. I don't know about you. That's yet to be determined. And we just had those conversations about stewardship, about growing the muscle of there's one thing to earn money. There's another thing to keep money. There's another thing to grow your money. And ultimately, we have to grow ourselves if we're ever going to keep that alive. And so that's what happened to the Vanderbilts. They were wealthy socialites that taught nothing to the future generation, so they just spent money. They own 10 mansions in Manhattan. They don't own any of them. They own the Breakers in Rhode Island. They no longer own that. They own the Biltmore in the Carolinas. They no longer own that. They lost that because they couldn't be stewards of it. They couldn't handle the weight of the money, the energy of it. So that's the issue.
And it seems like the financial literacy and just overall financial understanding is so important to not just growing wealth, but preserving wealth. I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist when I ask this question, but why isn't this taught in school? Like, why is this that the onus is really on the leader, let's say whoever is the head of household, like the family? Like, why aren't kids taught this in school?
Well, because teachers are good at math, they're not good at money. And math and money are different things. So I read an article in 2014 in The Economist where they went to schools and they started to teach finance. And what they found was those kids were actually worse off than some of the kids that weren't taught finance. And part of it's because if you have someone that's a W-2 that feels underpaid, that feels overwhelmed, and now you add another thing to their topic list, it's something that's already confusing and fearful, they project that on. And so I look at this a lot like I look at parenting. There are certain things that is my role and responsibility to teach my children. I have a really good friend that's great in this legacy game. I'm Rich Christensen. He taught me a lot of what I know around the family retreat structure. He had all of his kids, when they were 16 years old, start a business, and he became their business coach. 2 of his 5 kids hit $1 million of revenue by the time they graduated high school. So that's the difference. He's a business owner, and there's so many people in your community that are business owners. I know they're very busy, but I brought my son along last year. I did a book tour for Money Unmasked, and over 90 days, I spoke every week, sometimes twice a week, and my son came to every single event. He got to speak to all these great people. When I spoke at your event, man, the conversations I had in the short time I was here were phenomenal conversations. I wish my son was there eavesdropping on those conversations, how these people think, how they're able to add more value, how they built their practices, because you were having these great insights and having people share their insights of how they viewed money, how they invested their money, what their best investments were. And I was like, man, that kind of exposure is instrumental. So even if you don't have a lot of money, I found when I was 18 years old, I could talk to almost anyone because they loved that I was inquisitive with my little red memo pad, and I get a meeting almost anywhere because people like to pay it forward. So I think the education comes from the people who are already wealthy that have been there before, and not from teachers that don't feel wealthy and kind of resent it.
Yeah. It's also the kind of topic whenever money comes up, it's sometimes people associate it almost like the topic of tequila. They've either had some bad experience that they don't want to talk about it, or they assume there's
right.
some complexity out there that only experts understand. But you have a different perspective on this.
I think that 80% of what we think we need to know about finance, we don't have to know. There's the fundamentals, there's the basics, and once we understand our money persona, which is the hidden factors that determine our success or sabotage when it comes to money, so we understand how we operate, and then if we simply automate our savings and get deliberate with our investing, plug our financial leaks so we keep more of what we make, typically people overpay tax or interest or have hidden fees or commissions with investments, or they don't structure their insurances properly, and that's 10% or more of their income being lost. And then if we reinvest back into ourselves, especially business owners, invest in your people. I mean, Your people are amazing here. Your processes are dialed in. You have a certain amount of automation that lets people feel more connected to individuals when they're here. You feel it when you're at Crisp, just acknowledging that as someone that's been here twice now. So when we invest in ourselves, our skill sets, our ability to add value, everything from communication, marketing, like all of that, even our expertise, then we learn our investor DNA. And our investor DNA means we don't have to know all there is about investing, just the investments that are connected to who we are with our values, our competencies, our drivers, and we focus there. And then when we have a lot of wealth, then it makes sense to start considering diversification at that point. But it's focus first, it's invest in ourselves, it's discover our investor DNA so we become better investors, automate our savings, and then when we have enough liquidity, deliberately invest in things aligned with who we are. That's the formula. It's not more complicated than that. It's just that we think it is because there's billions of dollars making us think it is.
Yeah. So speaking of investor DNA, how does somebody go about determining what is their investor DNA? What different types of investors are there?
Yeah, so I've gotten this question so much lately that I'm re-releasing Killing Sacred Cows, my original New York Times bestseller, in July of 2024 with an entire guide on investor DNA because it is a big topic. Yeah. I think there's a big three with investing for people. One is real estate. It's not for everyone. Some people get underwater in it because it's not part of their investor DNA, but like you have an office here that you own because you're serving clients in it. Number two is businesses. I mean, acquiring businesses or building businesses, that's a huge part of it. And these sometimes aren't looked at the way that they should be because we look at it as putting money into Wall Street or funds or trusting other people before ourselves. And then the third one, and this is the game changer, is intellectual property. Intellectual property is so scalable. It doesn't have property taxes on it like real estate does. We could live pretty much anywhere if we build it properly. And so once you focus on the big three, then you can look at these other areas of investing. Now, to discover our investor DNA, a lot of it's just look at where do you have natural ability? What are you paying attention to? What are you reading about? I just know some people that they have such a knack for real estate and specific types, like especially apartment complexes, what a good deal is, how to find those good deals. They see deal flow all the time. And other people that they just don't like looking at spreadsheets or talking to bankers. So it's not really a good thing for them. So investor DNA is looking at our investment history, what worked, what didn't work, why did it work, what did we relate to, what didn't we relate to, and then that's kind of the start. And when I wrote this guide, the first thing I thought about was watching this Warren Buffett documentary where he talked about Ted Williams. And he said Ted Williams, when he batted 400, it's because he had a certain zone, which was the only zone he'd ever swing in, and anything outside that zone, he passed, even if it was called a strike. That's been Buffett's philosophy. And Buffett's not a stock market investor. He acquires companies through the stock market, but he knows what to pass on and what's aligned with his investor DNA. And he's been criticized for that, but 22% a year is pretty hard to beat. So if we could start learning what to say no to and discern opportunity from distraction, because every investment looks like an opportunity, but often it's just a distraction and derails us from our core competencies.
Yeah, and would you say, I mean, so for most of the people listening to this podcast, it's a law firm owner, right? They own their practice, they're building that practice, and there's always going to be these once in a lifetime opportunities that come across multiple times a year.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And it's easy to, to go squirrel and think, maybe I should get involved in this, maybe I should get involved in this type of business and this, pizza shop and this, dry cleaners. And, I hear these good things about these images on the internet that I can invest in. What would you say to them?
Monkey images, right? The NFTs.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. What I would say is every allocation of money also requires an allocation of time and energy. And every big corporation has a hurdle cost, right? They have a hurdle rate. If it doesn't hit this interest, then we're not doing it, even if it's profitable. So Jim Collins said the enemy of great is good.
Right.
And so even if it's a good opportunity, you got to ask, is it the best opportunity for you? Because if you have the right liquidity and you continue to focus on your business, you might find that acquisition to grow something that you really know will make a big difference. I have this good friend and long-term client, probably 10 years. His name's Mike. And he had a bunch of mutual funds when I met him. He didn't know anything about them. And he had this really profitable business. And he was looking at getting into other businesses. And I said, you're so good at list management. You're so good at health. Why don't you only look at health businesses? So here we are 10 years later, 9 more businesses, all related to that one business. And he has the most time of anyone I know because it was all integrated. It was all connected. He cashed out all of his mutual funds. He used the Rockefeller method that I teach in the book. He then bought and acquired businesses and put personalities in each one of those businesses. They were all aligned with the health side, and then got his private jet and lives a pretty good life. That's a much better situation than him getting distracted with all these things that might earn, but might be a loss. And that loss hits at confidence. Then you got to deal with, are you going to be involved in the investor meeting that explains what went wrong? And I just think there's too much energy that's leaking for those things.
Yeah, there's I don't know if you agree with this expression, but there's like, you build wealth through concentration, and then you preserve wealth through diversification.
I fully agree with that.
Would you say, I mean, for somebody who's, let's say they're building their business, and typically the growth rate is going to outpace pretty much any other investment they can make,
Yes.
whether it's in the stock market or elsewhere,
We're fully aligned.
With the highest degree of control.
Yes.
But at what point, even if they are still seeing that growth, should they then start investing in, in
Right.
other types of things?
We want to take business wealth and turn it into personal wealth. So I love that you said concentration first and then diversification second. Some people prematurely diversify, and some people think they're diversified, but they're not. Multiple funds might not be any level of diversification. It's all the same economic impact. You have the same reason for volatility. Or divorcification, they're divorced from the results and they don't understand it, and it's speculation. I think there's a lot of people that say they're investing when they're speculating. Part of this, what would the Rockefellers do, Rockefeller method is, what is one of the ways that you could transfer business wealth into personal wealth? The first thing is ultimate tax efficiency. So the money that's now being saved from taxes can build the personal wealth without robbing from the business. And building that in a very specific, safe, liquid, tax-efficient structure where the risk is mitigated and not volatile with the market, so it's available. That's like step one. I look at other steps like structure, how loan structure would be, or there's more advanced strategies from that. But if you just looked at that first strategy, and I love concentration first, and then slowly building personal wealth without robbing from the growth of the business.
So there's obviously a lot of money advice out there, and and I think there's people who resonate with certain personalities more than others. But at the same time, it's like, who do you trust, right? I know in the book you talk about Dave Ramsey and Suze Orman, and I'm sure they have their merits, but you guys disagree on certain things.
Yeah, we have a different framework. Like, look, I went and did Kiyosaki's podcast a couple times and he interviewed me 3 or 4 times, and I don't really agree with him on a lot of stuff either. I like his cash flow philosophies, but and he also is a little bit more investor DNA since I first talked to him, because he realizes not everybody's good at real estate, and he's still old and going to real estate conferences, so that's part of his DNA. But he also thinks that the world's going to end. You should never use a bank. You should just buy guns and butter and live in a bunker and a gold. And I don't agree with him on his gold and silver sentiment. I think that people get overly fearful and they get into these very volatile assets like gold and silver that don't provide any cash flow. And I get that we're in this fiat system, but I still think it's overhyped. Dave and Suze are great for people who spend more than they make. They spend more than they make, and their entire philosophy is all expenses are the same. They're bad. I believe there's 4 types of expenses. Number 1, destructive expenses, and those are, get rid of those. Borrowing to consume. Get rid of the things that you're paying for you're not utilizing. But then lifestyle expenses, you just pay cash for. The things you enjoy. It's everything from utilities to the clothes you buy to the restaurants you go to. Just don't go into debt. The third one is protective expenses. Asset protection, estate planning, insurances, liquidity. And the fourth one, this is like the 4th time I've said game changer. The game changer here is the productive expense. You put $1 in, more than $1 comes back. And they don't fully acknowledge that with their crowd. Dave does in his life. He's got a monstrous business, but he takes it to what I call lowest common denominator advice. It's very one-dimensional. You end up with a lot of money in a retirement plan without cash flow and paying off all loans. Now, that's probably better than being over-leveraged with nothing over here. But I'm really concerned about people that are just delaying tax and have to pay it in the future. They have a myriad of fees in these plans and completely reliant upon the stock market to fuel their entire life in the future, because the stock market's not good at cash flow. It might be good at accumulation, but in cash flow, we have to consider interest rate fluctuations, market volatility, expenses on the plan, and future taxes. That could be a big confiscation of someone's wealth, because if you hate paying taxes today, deferring them doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
It might even make it worse.
Yeah. there's the psychological component, right? And I think that's what a lot of probably Dave's advice goes towards in understanding that unless I draw the line as clearly as possible, just because he could say, like, I want you to cut up every credit card, even though there's sometimes benefits to putting some certain expenses on credit cards and collecting points and so on. But, I guess he believes that those that are spending more than they make don't have that level of financial discipline. Right. In your mind, how does somebody develop that level of financial discipline?
I believe in mindful cash management over budgeting. I think budgeting is what is part of the problem. It's kind of like the word diet, the first three letters being die. People that are always on a diet always seem to be on this yo-yo path versus a lifestyle. So mindful cash management is acknowledging the four types of expenses, number one. Number two, automatically saving money off the top. So if you just set up a sweep account, a separate account at your bank, and every time you make a payment to your personal account, there's a percentage that automatically goes. I'd recommend at least 15%. And to get to the 15%, use the 4 I's. Save money from the IRS, save money from the interest that you're paying by restructuring loans, renegotiating interest rate, or reallocating underperforming funds to pay off high interest rate loans. Third is find non-performing fees or hidden commissions inside of your investments and remove those so that ends up in this account. And 4, design your insurances where you only insure the catastrophic, not the inconsequential. So only transfer catastrophic risks and handle the rest on your own, which ends up freeing up money because the most expensive insurance is the first ones we pay for. So if we automatically sweep that money and it just is building up liquidity, that takes away a lot of the issue. And then rather than budgeting, if we are paying ourselves first, just look at your finances, whether it's weekly or biweekly, and say, have any destructive expenses crept in? How am I managing my lifestyle expenses after I've paid myself and not gone out of bounds and spent more? And where could I increase the amount of money I'm putting somewhere to be more productive? Could I hire someone? Could I develop a new skill set? Could I join Chris Beck's? That's the thing. And most people, if they get in that budgetary mindset, eliminate the very things that set them free. The mentors and coaches, the processes, and the hiring. Like, I've just seen far too many business owners hire cheaply rather than hire the best. And IBM said that the best people are 5,200% more productive than the second best. I'm like, even if they're 50% more in cost, you're still netting thousands of percent of return. And so it's more of a mindset of produce more than you consume. You can't shrink your way to wealth. And ultimately, we're in this world in a game of value creation. If you play the game of value creation, you'll be wealthy. If you play the game of shrinking, it's going to be living like a pauper, and that's not fun.
Yeah, and actually, I want to talk about that because there's different schools of thought. There's the full spectrum, right? Then there's people that they're not going to spend any money. There's like this whole movement.
I tried it. I tried it once. It sucked.
Of like, how do I live as frugally as possible? Right?
Like the FIRE movement?
The FIRE movement, exactly. Because it's like the financial independence, retire early, but you're not living large. You're trying to reduce your consumption as much as possible and saying, well, we can live off ramen noodles and then I have to earn less because we're going to spend less. And then on the other side of that, you've got the kind of the YOLO movement, right? Of saying, well, I work hard. I should be able to enjoy the money that I make. And they're taking all sorts of trips and buying watches and cars, et cetera. And I worry that those people, especially those that are in their 20s and 30s, what life will look like for them in their 50s and 60s. But is there a balance?
Yeah, I feel like on the YOLO, it's like, where's your permission slip? So I went to a Catholic school growing up and got in a fight with this kid, Max. And the coach just separated us, said, don't fight, you're going to get suspended. Go home and get this permission slip. We'll put boxing gloves on you in class tomorrow and you can just beat each other up. And then we did, and then we hugged out at the end. That permission slip allowed it to happen. The permission slip is if you've paid yourself 15% off the top first, you have permission to live off the rest in a way that's congruent and you don't spend more than you have. But if you're just saying, no, I'm going to live for today, forget about tomorrow, what happens when the surprise happens? Because we're all in store for financial surprises. If you're ill-prepared, you're going to find yourself in debt. You're going to find yourself in divorce. That happens quite often because when people spend so much and it's a great life and then all of a sudden that life, it's a struggle, they stop dreaming about the future because it's all about, the past was better and we don't have the money for it. So that's on that side. On the FIRE side, they asked me to speak once. I just said no because it's just incongruent. Budgeting isn't the answer. Financial independence is, first off. But when you have financial independence, it means you have enough recurring revenue from your assets to cover your expenses. That's not the time to stop. That's the time to swing for the fences. That's the time to say, what's my vision? What impact do I want to make? That's where you focus on serving others and solving problems because I can't imagine the mental power it takes to think about how to live off the least amount every single day. I think that takes more mental energy than thinking about how we produce the most value every single day. And what I know is I feel better about myself as I'm impacting more people. I was sharing a text that I got from an attorney today saying, yeah, this attorney out of New York, pretty big time attorney, is using the Rockefellers preamble inside of the trust for their clients because they read the book. I'm like, that's awesome. Like, we're making an impact. That feels good. If I'm like, hey, I go to turn my wife, I'm like, we only spent $3 today. That's not a fun conversation. So I think that we got to strike the balance of we're producing and being responsible. We're living for today, but we're prepared for tomorrow.
What are the different types of accounts, that somebody should have? And just, I know you encourage this and having it in their financial house.
So really a couple different types of accounts. Obviously just our regular spending accounts that money goes in and out of, but then it's really a wealth capture account. That's this checking savings that's just separated because of Parkinson's law. It's really important to separate. Parkinson's, not the disease. It was just this guy that said, we're going to study time. What happens if we tell an employee to get something done Friday by 4? They start working on Friday at 3 because time expands.
It's like when you're about to go on vacation.
Totally.
Yeah.
Then they said, what if we do this with money? And it's like, well, if someone has an increase in income with no plan, the expenses rise to meet or exceed that. Exceed is the scary thing within 3 to 6 months. So this separate account, your wealth capture account, that's step 1. Step 2 is a living wealthy account. You take a percentage and you say, we're going to put it in here and we get to spend that on guilt-free spending, value-based spending. What do we enjoy? Not what other people judge us for. Maybe you like lay down seats. Maybe you like certain clothes. Maybe you like certain wine. It's just like whatever you want. But you know that you've already saved 15% your wealth capture. So there's another percentage on top of that. Like one of my wealthiest clients ever, you would never know it if you saw him. I mean, he was on TV. He's well known. And I just remember saying, hey, we just found 120 grand a month for you. He's like, cool. I'm like, I'm not going to tell you about it unless you promise me you'll take 15 grand of this and spend it every month just on yourself. It's like, I don't even know what to spend it on. I said, well, if you're asking, I can make suggestions, right? We got him a new wardrobe because he's on TV all the time. And then he started buying like sound systems and different stuff for his house. And he just felt so much wealthier off this $15,000. By the way, all we did was get him a cashback 3% card from buying inventory because he's just paying it out of, a debit card. So it wasn't like a big deal, but it was still 6 figures a month. And he took 10%, just a little bit more than 10%. And made his life completely different because of this living wealthy account. So living wealthy accounts, enjoying life along the way, because having a better life, having more energy, enjoying, having things to look forward to will change and transform how someone shows up in every area of their life. And then a wealth creation account. Wealth creation account is you take this wealth capture, and once you've got at least 6 months of liquidity, you start putting that towards optimally funded, properly structured whole life insurance. Now, some people have a lot of opinion around this, but it's because the insurance company's taking on the risk. You're not. You've got full guarantees. And over a 30-year period of any time in history, whole life has beaten bonds. Over a 10-year period, it's always lost to bonds because there's insurance expenses. So imagine if you can have a bond portfolio without downside risk, a death benefit, protected from liability, protected from tax, and access to your cash along the way. It's a far superior storage asset for a store of value. You might not keep it there forever, but also, this is what's cool for all these estate planning attorneys. Tons of financial advisors kind of harm their clients unintentionally. They say, Michael, you know what? You're just starting out. Like, let's go way back before you are who you are today. They're like, you're just starting out, so you just got to buy some term insurance, invest the difference. You're going to get great returns on these term insurance, and then you're as successful like you are today, and you go talk to an attorney and they say, you got an estate tax problem. You need to buy some permanent insurance. Well, guess what? The way that I'm designing this with the Rockefeller method, they get the permanent insurance way early and they end up with the same amount of cash, if not more, and use it along the way. So it kind of comes along for the ride versus being 60 or 70 trying to qualify for this stuff. So it saves a huge amount of money just doing this properly.
Now, this is a world where, especially when you mention the word life insurance, I'm sure there's going to be people listening. They're like, ooh, right? Because they read or heard or experienced something where it is not going the right way, or they're either taken advantage of, or there's just some predatory tactics wherever. Like, can you clear the air on this?
Yeah. So first off, really wealthy people should definitely learn about private placement life insurance. But here's the deal. There's only 6 companies that I would consider worthy of someone owning permanent life insurance with. There's tons of people that are buying what they think is cash value permanent insurance, but all the risk is on them, not the insurance company. So there is plenty of people that deserve to be frustrated because they go, I thought I had $100,000 in this account, but there's 90,000 surrender charges. I want something that is straightforward and contractual, that also the agent has to drop their commissions drastically. In whole life, if you don't have at least 50% cash value in year one, and sometimes up to 90%, you probably don't have the right policy. And if you don't have dividends that are strong and paid out more than the minimum guaranteed every year, you're with the wrong company. There's only 6 companies that I think are good enough for people to be with, but they're participating mutual companies. There's not a huge return on these. My policies from 98, they probably got 6%. My policies more recently are, like 4%, which in today's environment is nothing too exciting. But I've used my cash value to buy a cabin that is massively appreciated, another cabin because it's the only other one available on the river, my house, a business. I did my first book, launched it, bought remnant rate, so I just have this cash that I use along the way, but then it's stable, it's stored, it's secure, and it comes with this death benefit. And I believe in buying my net worth and building cash flow so that death benefit's my future net worth. So I get it. If it's not designed properly, or if they listen to Dave Ramsey, it says it's always a bad idea. I just go look at the Fortune 500, look at their K1s. They all own corporate-owned life insurance. Look at banks, they all own bank-owned life insurance. A third of the bank's reserves are in cash value insurance. When it's designed properly, it's a great tool. When it's not, it's frustrating.
And I know we talked a lot about advice. There's a lot of people out there giving advice. What's been the best advice you've received, and what's been the worst advice you've received?
I think the best advice was, if you trust someone and they recommend something like go to this event or go to this program or buy this book, just do it and dive in. And I've really just heavily invested in myself. And I just joke with my wife, we're 22 years married now. I say, man, I was such an a-hole when we were first married. Thank God I've done all this personal development and met all these great people. So that's been really great. The worst advice that I got was, if you're going to be wealthy, you have to invest in real estate. And I don't do anything small, so I bought so much real estate that I didn't enjoy. And all my partners went bankrupt in 2008. I held on, didn't declare bankruptcy, had to deal with 109 properties, had to deal with all sorts of stuff. I ended up owning probably 250 properties over a 10-year span, and none of that really brought me joy. Sometimes I'd be like, wow, the market's gone up a ton, and I felt like more wealthy, but it wasn't like I was spending it. There was no tenant writing me a note saying, man, this property is so great. I love when I get notes from a reader of my book, or, when I give a speech and I get to talk to someone, like I get to feel fulfillment with that. So that was part of me learning investor DNA. So even though it was the worst advice, it led to a lot of lessons, but I also had my parents' money in this real estate because I thought this will help get them so much cash flow. My dad's a coal miner. He's got to retire. That sucks. And thankfully, they let me fight my way through and help me through. And I made it to the other side with a lot of bruises and a lot of lessons.
So as we come to a close, this being the Game Changing Attorney podcast, what does being a game changer mean to you?
Game changer to me is you find your voice and you share it with the world. You improve your life and you let other people know. And I say more than anything is you live abundantly and give value freely, because as soon as you do, more and more people build a connection and relationship with you, and they see you as an integral piece of their life. If you hold back or hide or think it's going to be stolen or don't want to do it, you lose. So people that hold on too tightly to their ideas rather than share them lose. I feel like the ones that share them most freely and make the value and the connections, they win at life.
I want to give a huge thank you to Garrett for taking the time to join us on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that I can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of my book absolutely free at GameChangingAttorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot me a text at 404-531-7691 and I'll answer any question that you've got for me. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it'll help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on our interview with Garrett Gunderson, see the show notes for this episode in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.